Welcome to the weird world of the past life detective. Today's podcast is called Location, Location, Location. It's connecting the dots between past and present lives of three medieval women who all lived in Norwich, Norfolk, in England. Rose had discovered something synchronous for herself during her past life detective work. Curiously, her past lives were in locations she had unconsciously come to live nearby in this life. There were three women in particular that she'd found she had past life and location connections with in ancient Norwich. These are Julian of Norwich, Eleanor Talbot and Mary Boleyn. These women became the main subjects of the book she began to write years ago. It took her many years to sleuth the clues to these lives. 8 years ago, Rose had moved from busy southeast London to the peace of the rolling countryside of Norfolk, England. Little did she know she was being drawn to return to her ancestral roots. The first synchronous location Rose moved to was in King Street, the oldest street in Norwich. After moving away some months later, she discovered she'd been in close proximity to St. Julian's Church and Shrine, the first of her medieval past lives as Julian of Norwich, a mystic nun and an anchorite born in the late 1300s. A psychic friend of hers had confirmed Julian to Rose as she'd seen her appear around her when she talked about her book. Oddly, King Street was also where Mary Boleyn's great-grandfather, Sir William Boleyn the Knight, had owned a trading building. It was number 28, listed as Sir William Boleyn's City House. A second location synchronicity with Rose's past life as Mary Boleyn. The Tudor building now sadly stands derelict, and even the modern building on the ground floor has fallen into disrepair. Apparently no one owns it, and it's being left to deteriorate until someone buys it. A year after arriving in Norwich, Rose started working at a location where the second of her medieval lives had lived, Lady Eleanor Talbot. Rose's office was in Carmelite House, Whitefriars, named after the monks with whom Eleanor had spent her last years as a lay nun. Her office was a stone's throw away from a restored undercroft archway upon which a green plaque is affixed, dedicated to Eleanor Talbot. Butler was her married name, who was buried in that very spot. If you want to read more about how she discovered these past lives, then there will be a link at the end of this blog you can follow. The fourth location synchronicity was where Rose had been born, in a remote village on the northern coast of Norfolk, 20 minutes from the birthplace of her third medieval life, Mary Boleyn. She was raised at the now famous Blickling Hall. Upon her return to her county of birth, Rose had chosen to settle further south in Norwich, also a 20 minutes drive from Blickling Hall. Rose's family had moved away from the little village of Sheringham when she was just 6 months old, but later migrated south to West Sussex, where they settled for the rest of her youth before she married. As they lived only half an hour's drive away, Rose and her family and friends would regularly visit the nearby Hever Castle to enjoy open-air music and Shakespearean plays. The columns in the Italian gardens served as a beautiful stage scene for the theatre, with the lake a wonderful view in the background. In her 30s, Rose returned from living abroad and chose to live near her father in Kent. Strangely, she'd again found herself a mere 20 minutes from Hever Castle, a fifth location synchronicity. This castle was of course where the Boleyn family had moved to from Norfolk when the children were young and became their permanent seat. King Henry VIII would have visited him there or at a nearby hunting lodge when he had his eye on Anne Boleyn, Mary's younger sister. A sixth location synchronicity for Rose was in Sevenoaks in Kent, where she lived not far from Knoll House, with its royal deer, which are still abundant to this day. This was a 10-minute walk from where Rose lived in her Tudor apartment. She used to visit often and picnic in this beautiful park, amongst what were once King Henry VIII's hunting grounds. Knoll House was also where Princess Mary, his daughter by the first Queen, Catherine of Aragon, had stayed. She had been demoted by Henry to Lady Mary and sent to live there on her own when he divorced her mother, and they were forbidden to see one another again. Once Henry VIII had died, she eventually became Mary I, or Bloody Mary. This was also one of Rose's soul tribe, the past life of her mother, and it was another synchronicity regarding familial estrangement, which had occurred in this lifetime due to her mother's religious shunning practices and their eventual separation. Once Rose had realised this past life pattern, she'd undertaken the shadow work to clear this karmic abandonment situation. In the neighbouring village to Sevenoaks was the once glorious Tudor Otford Palace. This was the 7th location synchronicity for Rose, which Henry VIII had taken off the Archbishop of Canterbury, Thomas Cranmer. The king would use it to stop off on his way to France with his royal entourage. Mary Boleyn would have been in the party of hundreds that travelled with him to meet King Francois I in Calais. Rose realised that she'd also lived in Tudor Avenue, of all places, just 10 minutes' walk from the ruins of Otford Palace. There is now only one meagre entrance tower left of the once splendid palace. Unfortunately, once King Henry VIII died, it fell into disrepair slowly. Strangely, as an 8th location synchronicity, both Rose and her sister Annabel had moved at different times to Woolwich in southeast London, and then to neighbouring Greenwich. Unbelievably, this is where their past lives, Mary Boleyn and Catherine of Aragon, had come to live hundreds of years previously. Catherine had joined Henry VIII as his first wife, and Mary Boleyn had been recalled from the French court to marry a courtier, William Carey, becoming a lady-in-waiting to the Queen at Greenwich Palace. Rose and Annabel had walked along this part of the Thames as part of their commute to work, Woolwich Arsenal being on their way home. This was of course where Henry VIII had built his impressive weapons arsenal and also his pride and joy, the Royal Navy. They also came to live next to Greenwich Park and would walk there most weekends. There's still a small pen of the original royal deer at the park too. Although Rose had since moved away to Norfolk, Annabel still works and lives in that very area. Synchronicities such as these 8 locations are important clues used by the past life detective to determine a person's key connections to their past lives. It is said that often a soul feels comfortable in a familiar location and chooses to return to it again and again. It may also be because there are unresolved issues or karma of some kind that the higher self decides to return to with a view to releasing and healing any trauma patterns. Find out more about the Past Life Detective's offerings to either explore your own past lives or do a soul contract release. You will also find a link to the book Past Lives That Matter: How to Remember, Heal and Transform Them